Good morning and welcome to our second town hall of the day, focusing on the university's budget and tuition outlook. For this hour, we will be answering questions from students and their family members. We've been taking those questions for about a week now, and we've already received very many. But we want you to keep submitting your questions throughout the live event. The links are still on this website, liveevents.psu.edu, and you can continue to submit them throughout the town hall. As I said, we have received many questions already. Some of them are very similar in nature, so I may combine them or pick a representative one for the group so that we can get to more topics today. Joining us for her second Penn State town hall ever is President Neeli Bendapudi. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
She is joined by Sara Thorndike, the Vice President for Finance and Business.
Good morning.
And Zack Moore, the Vice President for Government and Community Relations. And joining us via Zoom today is Damon Sims, our Vice President for Student Affairs. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Dr. Bendapudi, would you like to start us off with a few words?
I would. Thank you, Ben. And thank you, Dean, our ASL interpreter. We really appreciate you. Good morning, everybody. I am actually so delighted to have this opportunity to talk directly with our students and with their families. Thank you. I am in month 5 on the job, and I can tell you I've never worked harder on a job, and I've never enjoyed anything more. It is such an honor and a privilege to be here. So I've been able to travel to pretty much all of the Commonwealth campuses. After today, I think there'll be one left, and I've had the opportunity to watch my first home game at Beaver Stadium and be part of Arts Festival, enjoy musical theater, and really interact with students at every single campus I've been at. So thank you. I do truly believe we have the best students in the world. Now, every university president will claim that, but I have a reason for saying that. Everywhere I've been, our students have impressed me because they will share concerns. That's why I make time for them, but they also come up with solutions. And I think that's uniquely Penn State. That's probably why we have as many CEOs in our ranks of alumni as we do, and why we rank so highly among places that employers want to hire from. So that's very, very key, and I'm grateful for that. So why this town hall? Well, one of the things that really impresses me about Penn State is the wisdom in the we are spirit. We're not a university that says I am. We say we are. We realize that we are only as strong as the teams and the families that we belong to, that we build, that we nurture. We are all one Penn State family. So I'm hoping to engage in these series of conversations about important topics for Penn State. And I want to say thank you before I go on. When I say we are, it's the team. I want to start with the team. Ben, thank you, our Stratcom group, Zack, Sara, Damon. I truly am very fortunate to have a phenomenal group that I get to work with. I'm also teaching, by the way, for the first time in 12 years, and it's been fabulous. I get to see some of our students, and I will host this town hall for you in the same spirit. I've told my students, I actually met with them last evening, that teaching is a co-creation. It's not something we do to someone. We all learn together. So just as I learn from them, and hopefully they learn from me, today's town hall is offered in the exact same spirit. In terms of my philosophy for student success, I'd like to share with you kind of a simple rubric maybe. It might sound corny, but I like to keep things simple. Everybody who gets a paycheck from Penn State, I want them to be focused on student success, whatever you do. And it's pretty simple, really. Beyond physical and mental health, which are incredibly important, what are the keys to a student being successful? I call them the ABCs. A is academic preparedness. Are we doing everything we can to make sure that our students don't just graduate? That's very key, by the way. Dropping out of college leaves the students in the worst of all possible worlds because they have some debt and nothing to show for it. So first is academic preparedness to face the courses they have, but also to move on to meaningful jobs, and careers that will uplift them, their families, and their communities. B stands for a sense of belonging. Every one of us wants to have a sense of belonging, that this is a place that includes us, wants us to succeed, and I want that feeling for every single Penn Stater, no matter who you are. C is the cost. We've got to make sure that we keep cost affordable. That's not just a nice to do, that's part and parcel of our mission. We are the only land-grant University of Pennsylvania. My own life was transformed because of access to higher education. So containing those costs is very critical. In today's town hall, that's really the topic we'll be focusing on, cost. I will tell you that being new to Penn State, there are so many incredible things I discover every single day, but I also discovered some challenges, particularly with our budget. And so this is a challenge we need to address. As anyone knows, balancing your own checkbook month to month, year to year, we cannot run up debt without having to somehow figure out a way to pay for it. And that's kind of a situation that we are in. But my commitment to you, our students, on the ABCs of student success is very, very, very strong. That's our number one priority, to keep it affordable for everyone so that you can go on to do what you want to do. Just one more comment, and then I'll turn it over to Sara Thorndike for some opening comments. We are going to provide you with some resources as we go along, and we'll make sure to follow up with you with some of those also, especially for the parents, the families that are joining us. Thank you. You are sharing the most valuable people in your lives with us. We are mindful of that. We are grateful for that. And I want to say our future is so bright. I feel extraordinarily confident about this. I want to tell you this is where I will retire. And I feel very, very confident looking out not just in month 5, but at year 5 and beyond, that Penn State is a gem, a unique asset to the United States higher education system. And I'm so proud and privileged to be your president. With that, I'm going to call on Sara for some opening remarks. She is the CFO, so has a big job, and we wanted to demystify the process for all of you.
Thank you, Neeli. I really appreciate it. So we are taking a number of steps to set Penn State up for long-term success. We do have to account for significant inflation. We know you're all facing that as well. We've had flat state funding for the last 3 years, significant COVID-related costs. We have had some enrollment and revenue-related pressures. Some of those are COVID-related as well. Despite this, we have held our tuition rates at the same level for 3 of the last 5 years. And we're taking a multi-pronged approach to help improve our financial situation. Some of that is with enhanced revenues. You may have received an email from me regarding corporate sponsorships, for example, where we're looking at ways to diversify our revenues. We're also taking a number of steps to reduce our expenses and increase our efficiencies. Our current budget for the fiscal year 23 includes a 3% rescission in all of our unit budgets, for example. We're also doing a strategic hiring freeze. And I say strategic because we know it's really important to continue to hire for positions that are critical for student success. But there are other positions where we're slowing down the hiring a bit while we work on balancing out our budget. We're also working on a comprehensive budget review process. In other words, we're looking at how do we allocate out our funds so that we ensure that units that really need money to continue to support student success have what they need. The budget is going to go to our board in September. Normally it goes forward in July. We had some work to do on our budget, and I'm really happy to say that the budget we're presenting to them next week is significantly improved from the original draft budget that we had in July. I also want to take the opportunity just to talk a little bit about how finances work in higher education in general, but also here at Penn State. We're super complex. I mean, we run a whole system with many different campuses. And when you look at our financial statements, you may say, I don't understand. The balance sheet is really large. The endowment is really large. How could there be financial challenges? It really boils down to how we're allowed to use the different pockets of money that we have. So we are so proud and so very grateful of the numerous gifts that the university's received. We just had a $2.2 billion campaign. Critically important. Much of that money went for student scholarships. So that is essential for student success. Unfortunately, though, 99% of those gifts are restricted for a donor purpose that falls outside of our operating budget. We don't usually get donors who want to help us pay for broken windows or replacing carpet or for a staff salary. And so our operating budget still has to have other funding sources to pay for those types of expenses. Our endowment itself, just to kind of help understand how endowments work, when a donor gives an endowed gift, we can never spend the actual gift that they gave us. Again, we're so grateful for those gifts. They're so important. But what that endowed gift does is it gets invested, and then the investment income is what helps support whatever the donor wanted their money to go towards. We take a 5% income distribution that helps as the market ebbs and flows up and down. And often that will go towards things, again, like student scholarships, maybe certain buildings, maybe an endowed professorship. So we're very grateful for those gifts. But again, it doesn't help me with my operating budget and to balance it. We also sometimes will see lots of construction going on at the university. Much of that construction gets paid by donor gifts or by money that comes specifically from the Commonwealth for those purposes. Enhances student success. We're so grateful. We have a very large infrastructure here that we have to maintain. Research. Excellent research. A huge research budget. But everything that we get in for research, again, is restricted to be used to support research. So it doesn't help with the operating budget. And then you may be wondering about, well, what about the money I'm paying to go see a football game or to live in the residence halls or to pay for my food plan or to park? All of those organizations, which we call auxiliaries, are all required to be self-funded. We don't use any tuition dollars or any state funds to pay for our auxiliaries. So they have to charge enough and generate enough revenue to cover all of their expenses. And so again, it doesn't help me with the general operating budget. So we are so incredibly sensitive to charging more for tuition, and we only do it when we really must. But those two biggest buckets for us, being tuition and state appropriations, we do need to see more money in those buckets at times to help us with all those expenses I mentioned. Let's talk a little bit about state funding. Again, we're very grateful for what we receive, but Pennsylvania is ranked 47th out of 50 in the nation. So our state funding is lower than many of the other states. And within Pennsylvania, we receive the lowest amount of state funding at about $5,600 per student. We double that amount. And for our resident students, there's a differential between both resident and non-resident of about $13,000. Again, we are very sensitive to the full price of tuition for all of our students. We know our out-of-state students are also price sensitive, so we really take that into account when we're thinking about our tuition increases. And frankly, it's a big part of why we were really cognizant to make sure as much money could go to financial aid as we could possibly afford in this last tuition increase. We want to make all of our budget decisions so that we can provide an excellent education. As a parent myself, that is extremely important to me and to all of us, so that we can deliver quality education at the best cost that's affordable and the best price to all of us.
Dr. Bendapudi, you'd like to add something?
I just wanted to say that what is really cool today is that my 3 colleagues that are joining us all are Penn State parents too. And so Some have kids at one of the Commonwealth campuses. Some have kids here on University Park. And I love that because it means everything that you are saying and talking about, we hear not just from the perspective of professionals, but as parents who are also thinking about the experiences their children are having here at Penn State.
Thank you both for those thoughts. Sara, you mentioned tuition several times in some of your opening comments, and that is one of the things that we have been asked about quite a bit through the submissions, specifically why the tuition was larger this year than it has been in years past. And can you address why that happened?
Sure. So when you adjust for inflation, the cost of a Penn State degree is actually less now than it was a decade ago. With that said, we realize it is still expensive, and we are very sensitive to trying to pay a lot of attention to the net price after financial aid in particular. There were many things, as I mentioned, that went into the unavoidable need to increase tuition. Some of that is related to state funding being flat. Some of it, again, is related to the fact that everything you can imagine that it takes to provide a world-class education increased in costs. Pressure from labor, all of our goods and services, our ag equipment, our food, our utilities, everything that's in your personal budgets increased for us significantly. And so we are really trying to be very sensitive and very thoughtful when we set our tuition, but we were just in a place where we didn't have other revenues that were increasing, and we needed to increase tuition this past year.
Thank you. And taking that into account, some students still feel that the university is passing off their cost increases to the students. Specifically, the University Park Undergraduate Association submitted this question saying, is this going to be a sustained annual increase that the university is going to rely on every year moving forward?
Yeah, our increase this past year was a bit higher than it's been because it has been flat for so long. We are doing everything we can as employees to also reduce our costs, while at the same time not hurting the world-class education that students receive and paying for all of the numerous services that we know are so critically important to our students. So as I mentioned, we did a 3% rescission. We will continue to look at our budgets and figure out how to balance our budgets best way we can. That saved us about $46 million. But we also care a lot about what we pay the faculty and the staff that are providing those services. So at the same time we're decreasing those costs, other costs are going up. And so we're really sensitive about not passing through any more than necessary. We've hired a consultant from the National Association of College and University Business Officers to help us think about how we allocate our funds. So that can be done in the best way possible to support student success. And again, we're looking at ways to find new revenues that are outside of tuition as well. Corporate sponsorships, how do we monetize some of the assets we have? How do we think about generating additional revenues outside of tuition? We're also working to increase enrollment. That's critically important to us, particularly where there's capacity at our Commonwealth campuses.
Ben, if I may add to that.
Please.
So it's a complicated problem, I get it, but it's also simple in terms of the levers that we have. So there's no question we have a challenge. The good news for you, I guess, is that I am a retired banker, but we will get to this. We will be able to address it. There's really three things we need to do. One is focus on our revenues. We've got to figure out, as Sara said, how do we monetize our assets? We've hired somebody for enrollment management to really be thoughtful. For example, over the past 5 years, it's not just COVID, enrollment at our Commonwealth campuses dropped by about 20%. So we've got to look at what will we do to really help the entire system thrive. We've got to look at costs, and we are looking at costs. So for example, we have a GC that's retiring, and so we've moved someone else who was VP for administration into that role, and I've decided not to fill that position. So we'll just remove that position. Those duties will move to my chief of staff. So we'll do everything we can to cut costs. The third thing we need to do is really look at our budget model. So I can't resist, I'm a teacher at heart. It's called incremental budgeting, where we say, this year you get what you got last year, plus or minus a little bit. That doesn't make sense because the needs might be very different. Some units might be growing faster or slower than others. Why I wanted to jump in, Sara, is when we say recession, it means it's an across-the-board cut. So I want you to know that we are committed to try to keep costs low and not really pass on costs. But again, you raise a very good point about adjusting for inflation. How do we provide the incredible experience that you all deserve and that Penn State promises?
Thank you. And Neeli, we'll be sticking with you. And this question comes from the Council of Commonwealth Student Governments, and they'd like to know how you and the university are supporting students who have been affected by those tuition increases.
That's very, very key to us. The Commonwealth campuses in particular are really at the heart of our land grant mission. You all know that we are the only land grant university in Pennsylvania, and that means we have a deep commitment to access and affordability. We have a commitment to economic impact for the Commonwealth, and we have a commitment to research that makes a difference. So having been on the Commonwealth campuses, after today there'll only be one campus I haven't been at. We are focused on that access and affordability mission. We took the tuition increase and 14 million actually went back into need-based aid. And you all know it's not a perfect metric, but we decided to keep tuition the same for all families that have household incomes of $75,000 or less. So these are some of the ways in which we are trying to tackle the issue. And Ben, maybe there'll be a question later, and if so, we can talk about it. We didn't pull this number out of thin air. We wanted to make sure that we took into account the national median household income and the Pennsylvania median household income. And 75K a year is above both. So we said at least for half of the families, more than half of the families across the United States and more than half of the families in Pennsylvania, they should see no increase in tuition because of the increase.
And we can follow up on that right now. Why was it important for you to look at both those numbers?
When you think about it, a dollar increase or a 2% increase is not the same at different household income levels. I'm not ashamed to say that I grew up with no running water till I came to the United States. So a small increase for me at that point in my life when I came here would have been crushing. Now, thanks to this incredible country and the opportunities that it affords, a 2% increase, my child will be okay. I'm not saying that just because you're over that 75K, that it's not a pain point at all. Because believe me, I get it. As a business person, whether you have one child or 3 children, what else is going on in your life? These are tough. At every single income level, trying to get your kids through college is a challenge. But given we had to make tough choices, we said, let us make sure we stay true to our mission of access and affordability and use that number so that, as I said, we know more than half the families across the country and more than half the families in Pennsylvania will not see a tuition increase for their children at Penn State this year.
Thank you very much. Damon, who is joining us remotely, we have a question for you that came in. And another thing that people really want to know is how is this all going to affect their student experience while they're at Penn State, which is why many people come here. There's other things beyond the classroom. So will there be any cuts to programs, services, staffing as a result of the budget?
Thanks, Ben. Good to see you. And sorry I'm not there in person, but very glad to join this conversation with students and their families. And that question that you asked is one that I get quite a bit these days as we talk about these budget challenges. This is my 15th year as Vice President for Student Affairs at Penn State, and the one thing that I think has struck me most throughout that time is just how rich the experience for students is both in the classroom and outside the classroom. I think we're extraordinary as a university in the way we are able to do both of those in a complementary fashion and offer a very robust, just extraordinary student experience at all locations. I think, because of that, it is critically important that despite the challenges that Sara and Neeli have described, we sustain that commitment to the experience outside the classroom. We want students to be as engaged as they always have been. We want them to participate in their organizations, their service activities, their outreach in various ways. We want them to connect with one another. I think Neeli's emphasis on the B, belonging, is very important in this, because an awful lot of those experiences that students have outside the classroom is where that sense of belonging is engendered and sustained. So we have to sustain that commitment, and we shall. I think many of the programs and services that we represent outside the classroom really came about because of student expression of interest, or even families' expression of interest. So there's good purpose that is served by all of these. We just have to be mindful of the need to be as efficient in the delivery of these services as we possibly can be, so that we're attentive to the C in the ABCs, the cost imperative. And I think that we can be creative in the way we go about delivering the services and programs that students benefit from. And we're going to do that best if we talk to students themselves and to their family members about what is important to them, what we must sustain, and how we sustain it, so that it continues to offer that experience that students expect at Penn State.
Thank you, Damon. And I'd like to stick with you for a moment. You mentioned some services that we have here at Penn State, and we've gotten some questions specifically about the mental health services. And what will the university's investment to counseling and psychological services look like in this budget landscape?
Yeah, another good question, Ben. Student mental health has been an emphasis across the country, actually, for the last number of years. I think many of our listeners know that. There's been real concern about the growth in need for these services. At Penn State, in that time, we have worked closely with our partners among student leaders and others to think about how we can expand those services to meet that need and ensure the kind of opportunity for success that the students require, and that otherwise might be impeded somewhat if these services weren't available to them. These are the kinds of services that really are essential services. They go to the core of student success. Student well-being and health are extremely important to us always. They remain important to us. I do not see any expectation for a retreat from our commitment to these services. The expansion that we have benefited from in the last number of years should be sustained. We want to be able to sustain that at all locations. But again, we want to continue to be creative, thoughtful, mindful of the need to keep costs down. And we want to work closely with our student partners in making sure we're delivering those services as effectively as we can. But they go to the core of what we do on behalf of students, and I don't expect those to be diminished in any fashion.
Thank you. Neeli, we have another question for you, and specifically, and this is a concern that we've heard from our partners across the Commonwealth, are there any plans to close down any of the Commonwealth campuses?
No. I will tell you that one of the reasons I took this job was how complex Penn State is and how unique. We truly are unique among institutions of higher education in the United States. Why do I say that? 96% of the citizens of our Commonwealth live within 30 miles of one of our locations. Just think about that, Ben. The ability it gives us to really be part and parcel of the growth of the Commonwealth. I have seen firsthand how important these Commonwealth campuses are. It's not just for education, but they are the social, economic, cultural centers of the communities they serve. Instead, what I want to do is really think about how else do we leverage these? We've been talking about health. We're talking about extension. Here we have these campuses. How do we become even more responsive to the local workforce needs? Because that's a very big part of what we do as a land-grant university. I can tell you as a parent that I heard a long time ago from another parent when I was Dean of Business who said, Neeli, never forget. Whether my child gets a BBA or an MBA, the 3 letters I want to see after graduation are J-O-B. So, that's really important to me. It stuck with me, gosh, a decade later. So part of what I want to do is make sure these Commonwealth campuses continue to thrive and meet the needs of the Commonwealth.
Thank you for that. We do have a follow-up question on that one. Many people have noted that there were some program closures at a campus, Penn State Altoona, and they're asking, are there going to be any similar closures in units across the Commonwealth?
Again, a wonderful question. There are no plans to just go in and shut down programs. Our chief academic officer, our fabulous provost, Justin Schwartz, actually talks about this as well, that this is not something that we'll do in a top-down fashion. We will look at the programs we have across the Commonwealth. I think it's an incredible strength that we have distinct programs. For example, at Altoona, I think it's Railway Technologies Engineering. See, I think I remember, is that each of them has something distinctive they offer. And don't even worry. Some people think just because we have duplication, a program is being offered in a couple of places, does it mean you'll shut down one? No, not necessarily, because we are so dispersed, we might need engineering at more than one location. At the same time, I owe it to you, because when we talk about cost containment, let us say there's no student demand for particular programs or courses, then we cannot keep them open because that cost will have to be borne by the rest of you. This will be an incredibly collaborative process. You have chancellors who are very thoughtful. We have a vice president for Commonwealth Campuses, Dr. Kelly Austin, who is working very, very closely on this. This is also true for University Park. We're working with all of the deans. So please know that our singular focus is on your success, student success. So how do we keep programs that prepare you for success in whatever comes next?
Thank you. Speaking of that personal success, we had another question from UPUA, and they want to know, what is the university doing to speak to students, to give advice to students who are having to make even tougher financial decisions about their commitments to Penn State?
That's a great point, and I am fully cognizant of that and will do everything I can to help you be successful. There are many things here. One is our Sokolov-Miller Center. I really hope you take advantage of it. The generosity of our donors that will be there to help you figure out how to manage your finances. Now, that sounds great. You might say, that's great advice, telling people to pull themselves up by their Gucci bootstraps, right? So I get it. For some people, it's not just that. There is need. I'm very proud of our students who are really bringing attention to student poverty, not just hunger, it's housing. We are committed to it. And as I look at it, we have to be more nimble. We have to be bolder in how we address these issues. So it's partnerships. Partnerships not just with the city and the state, our faculty and staff and students, but including with our corporate partners and our alumni. So we're raising funds for this. It is top of mind for me. That's why of the ABCs, the C is there. Reach out, ask for help. We do invest. Penn State really tries to put significant amounts of money into need-based aid. And that's important, but I fully recognize there's a lot more we need to do.
Thank you. You mentioned some resources like the Sokolov-Miller. We will make sure that we include links to those in the follow-up communication from this town hall. That way you don't have to Google them in the middle of this.
And one last thing, one of the dreams I have, we'll get to it, is to stop the students from having to go to 100 different places for help. Because if you have food insecurity or if you have a mental health issue, that compounds it, right? You may not be, or a car breaks down, whatever that might be. We're working on it. I know we have a tough budget situation, but we want to get to the place where you only have to reach out to one place, and then you have someone who's your guide in helping to navigate a complex system.
Thank you. It was noted in some of the opening remarks that Penn State's per-student funding lags behind other PA universities. Zack Moore, this would be a good question for you. Has the university been in conversation with the state to try and get some additional funding there?
That is a good question, Ben. Absolutely. The answer is yes. We are always advocating for greater resources from the Commonwealth for Penn State University. And the reason is because all of the funding from the state goes to fund programs that directly benefit students. programs and costs, things like faculty and staff salaries, building expenses, utilities, other things like that. And so we know that Commonwealth appropriations and funding from the state is the number one factor that we can influence or try to influence that impacts student tuition. And so this is something that we're always working on. In this past year, we asked for a 5% increase from the Commonwealth. And had we received a 5% increase, that would have mitigated any tuition increase that we would have needed to implement. Unfortunately, due to a variety of factors out of our control, we received flat funding again from the Commonwealth. And while we're really grateful for every dollar we receive from the Commonwealth, that puts greater pressure on our budget and then greater pressure on tuition. And so, again, I want to repeat something that Sara said a few minutes ago. We have been operating at sub-inflationary rates for the last decade, both in appropriations and in tuition, even including the most recent tuition increase. We are still below 2010 funding levels from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and our students do receive less than any other public university on a per student basis, up to $2,500 less per student than the next lowest public university in Pennsylvania. And so we continue to work on this. We continue to advocate for increases. We need everyone's help, though. This is a very complex problem at the state level in particular with regard to budgets and budget pressures on the state. And so we need everyone's help in attacking this challenge.
If I can follow up on that point you just made, we had some people note in the comments that they saw in the news that the governor was setting aside some more money that was going to come to universities, $40 million and specifically $12 million for us. Why did we still go ahead and raise tuition?
Well, again, another good question, and we have been told by the governor and the governor's staff that we will receive one-time federal COVID relief funds to Penn State because we didn't receive any increase in our annual appropriation. We still have not received those funds, and we don't yet know exactly when we will. So it's a challenge to budget for that money when we haven't yet received it. The other thing I would say is that it would really not be prudent to plan multi-year or long-term budget expenditures based on one-time funds. And so I think the president and Sara made good decisions to not budget for those dollars until we receive them. But the president has committed to using those dollars that we receive towards student success to the greatest extent possible. And by that I mean we have to follow federal rules and how we expend those dollars. And so we will use those dollars to the greatest extent possible for student success.
Thank you. There's been some talk about how we set the in-state and out-of-state tuition rates and how it's influenced by the university funding that we get from the state. Can you talk a little bit about, and because parents are asking, what goes into setting those rates and what we can do to perhaps lessen the tuition burden for some of our out-of-state students? Sara, could we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So again, we are extremely sensitive when we are looking at what we charge for tuition. We do know that intentionally we get money from the state to charge a lesser amount for resident students. But we also know that our non-resident students are extremely important to us. We set rates so that we can balance the budget the best way possible, knowing that that's just one really, really important piece of multiple revenue sources that we receive. So if we can reduce our expenses, that takes pressure off of increasing our tuition, for example. If we can come up with other revenues from other sources, that also takes pressure off of us increasing our tuition. We don't set our tuition to do anything but to help us try to balance our budget with all of those pieces considered. And then we also think about financial aid because we know ultimately net price for both our residents and our non-residents is really what matters, what you're going to see on your tuition bill. So we try to put as much money back into financial aid as we can, both on a need basis, but also for merit and scholarships as well. And we fundraise intentionally. We ask donors to help us support with both of those so that we can go ahead and provide those very important discounts to students.
Thank you very much. If we could stick with you for a little bit, and I know you touched on this in your opening statements, but we have gotten the question about the $2.2 billion that we raised, and we're very proud of that number, but why can't we use that to lower tuition?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it goes back to the complexity of the finances in higher ed and how endowments work, but also we have an obligation to follow whatever the donors asked us to do when they give us those funds. And we're extremely grateful for them, and we fundraise a lot for financial aid and endowments that support financial aid. It's personally very important to me as well. So I'm grateful for what we receive, but again, 99% of that $2.2 billion was restricted by the donors. So we couldn't use it just for general operating expenses. We couldn't lower tuition because we received those funds.
And if I may, Ben, just to expand upon this, Sara mentioned this already. Remember, when someone gives a gift, an endowment, the $2.2 billion, the donor wants it to be in perpetuity. They don't want us to touch the principal. So we don't really have access. The majority of it, what, 90, whatever percent. It's not the 99%.
50%.
99% is the, with restrictions or, strings attached. I want you to spend on engineering. I want you to give this to social work, et cetera. About the challenge for us is that we can only spend the interest that we earn on it, the income that we get on the gift as well.
Thank you. And if I could follow up, we had another question from the Graduate and Professional Student Association, similarly talking about, we see these big numbers coming out, and they noted that the Big Ten Sports Conference just signed a TV deal for $1 billion. Again, why can't we use some of that money to help the budget or perhaps increase salaries?
Of all the groups of students, the one that I had personal experience with is being a graduate student. I was not an undergraduate student here. And I get it. Being a graduate student is very, very difficult. You think about not having the time or the money. You are in some ways like the student, in some ways like the faculty member that you're trying to aspire to. We have done everything we can. In fact, for the graduate students, I want you to know the increase that you received was higher than what we gave to other segments, and we sometimes get criticism for it. I've had to explain to faculty and staff in particular, who've written in and said, why do graduate students get this increase? We've been adamant that they add so much to our value of what we are as a Penn State University, and so that support will continue. As for the athletics, it's a complex issue. One of the things is that auxiliaries, again, as Sara explained earlier, actually are self-sustaining. And a lot of what we are trying to do through these funds is make sure that we put it back into those athletics facilities. Please remember that the revenues that are generated help with the ABCs for student athletes, and only a small percentage of them are actually in the revenue sports. So the money that we get from these revenue sports, we have 31 teams. So we'll also support the Olympic sports. And once we account for it, we do look at where else can these funds be used. Remember, it's a deal is announced as very big, but it's over a period of the contract, and what each of us gets and how we actually invest it is a different matter.
Thank you very much. This next question is going to be for Zack. We've heard from some students who participated in some of the advocate efforts that you've talked about, the Penn State Capitol Day. And despite those efforts that they made, that we were flat funded, as you pointed out, and tuition increased. So speaking to those students and potential students at large, should they continue with these efforts? Should they help you through programs like Advocate Penn State?
Well, thanks for that question, Ben. This is actually my favorite topic to talk about, so I'm going to try to limit myself to just a couple of minutes on an answer. The short answer is yes, we need students and parents and families to continue to advocate for Penn State. I can tell you that the reason we get state funding is because of our advocates. They do a tremendous job for us, in particular students who are great advocates for us with elected officials. I think the answer, though, is that we need to double and triple down on our advocacy. We need many more advocates in Harrisburg in particular to tell the story of why Penn State is important to them, to their families, and their communities. So let's just consider a couple of numbers if we can. We educate over 50,000 Pennsylvania resident students per year. When you add in the number of employees that we employ in Pennsylvania and the number of alums in Pennsylvania, our universe of potential advocates is over 380,000. Imagine 380,000 potential advocates singing with one voice in support of Penn State. I can tell you that if an elected official, if we only got 10% of those advocates, of those universe of advocates, speaking up for Penn State, 38,000 advocates would make a difference in our advocacy efforts in Harrisburg. By contrast, we have about 13,000 people in our advocacy database right now, and at Capitol Day, which you mentioned, we had less than 1,000 people participate in our virtual Capitol Day. So when you compare the number of people who are actively advocating, which we appreciate and make such a difference for us, with our potential universe of advocates, there would be such a difference to our efforts. We have a slide prepared so that you can maybe scan the QR code that we're going to put up on the screen. I would encourage everyone that's listening, students, families, parents, in-state and out-of-state, to sign up to be an advocate for Penn State. We have built a comprehensive plan, a comprehensive and easy-to-use system that we will, I promise not to spam you, and I promise that we will activate our advocates when it's most needed and when it's most impactful. And so if we can continue to grow that advocacy effort, I can guarantee that we will have greater impact in Harrisburg, which will improve our efforts at a greater state appropriation.
Zack, I have a quick question. It's a layup for you.
Okay.
If someone already advocated last year, why should they advocate again this year?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for that question. This is a constant effort to educate legislators and elected officials. In Harrisburg in particular, we expect to have probably more than 50 new elected officials after this election in November. That's about 1/5 of the General Assembly will turn over in 1 year. And so not only do we have to educate the new elected officials, but we have to re-educate those who we've talked to last year. If we only talk to them once a year in May of every year at Capitol Day, that's not enough. We need to be in regular communication with them, showing them the value of a Penn State education, the value of Penn State research, the value of Penn State outreach on our communities, on our families, and on our students.
And if I may, Ben, I want to add to this one more time, which is I need all of you. Please, we need you. Just like think about Thon. Think about how we come together as an entire family to raise funds and awareness of an important cause. We need that sort of energy for Penn State. I want to remind you of what you've already heard. It's not the fault of anyone in the General Assembly now. We are truly thankful to them, but it's a historical artifact that all the state-related universities got a certain amount of funding. Over time, we kept growing, and the others did not grow at the same level. But think of how unfair it is in a way that when we get a student, a Pennsylvania student that we educate, we get far less support from the state per student, even though we educate more Pennsylvanians, more Pell Grant students, we have more reach than our peers. We're not saying they should get less. We're just saying we need to be brought up to the same level. I'm going to use this as a challenge, Zack, for Penn Staters. From what I have seen of our students and our families, what number did you want to get to? At least 10%?
Yes.
So what would that be? What did you say?
38,000.
38,000 people. I feel like I'm on some pledge drive. We are at WPSU after all. That's appropriate. Please, everybody, you say what can you do to help? That will help us keep tuition low and maybe even reduce it. We need this support. So please, that website, we'll put it up there. And families, wherever you are, not just in Pennsylvania, please, please, please help us.
Again, it's advocate.psu.edu, advocate.psu.edu, and It's really easy to sign up. And when we have an action alert, literally it takes minutes, 2 or 3 minutes to contact your legislators.
Great, and we will include that link in the follow-up. Moving on, we do have a lot of topics to cover. Sara, this next one's for you. Is the university committed to offering access grants? We talked about that $75,000 limit. Are you committed to offering grants next year and the year after that?
Yeah, we sure would love to do so. We really need to see where we're at from a budget perspective, but we've been trying to set that money aside in perpetuity, the best ability we can. Once we get through this new budget allocation model and get through the fiscal year 23, we'll have a much better sense of whether we can continue to offer them every year.
Okay. Thank you very much. Neeli, we have another question for you, and it's something you addressed in the previous town hall, but it was noted by the people that are submitting questions to this as well, the drop in U.S. News rankings. And specifically, they're asking us how the university can charge more money when we're being ranked lower.
Okay.
Can you address?
Absolutely. Glad to do this. So I want you all to know that there's a difference between how disciplines are ranked and how the university overall is ranked. So look at our disciplines that they rank and see how very, very well we do. I want you to remember that. And this year, there was actually a problem with how U.S. News calculated our overall ranking. We are addressing it with them. We're trying to make sure that they're aware. But I will tell you that our students are considered some of the most employable. We do so very well on the rankings that matter. Look at our research records. This is truly a flaw in terms of how they calculated our graduation rates and some other issues. We are bringing it up, and we'll never be the tail wags the dog, but we know we're doing the right things, and that's reflected.
Thank you. This next question comes to us again from the Graduate and Professional Student Association. You discussed the stipends earlier, but they're pointing out specifically that living in State College, according to the MIT living wage calculator, I'm quoting from them, the need is to make 17 and 11 cents per hour, or about $34,000 a year. So what calculus goes into deciding what graduate stipends should be, and is there a way to get that level up?
Again, 4 months into the job, I cannot speak to what the calculus was how we set. Nationally and here at Penn State, I know there's a concerted effort to raise funds for graduate students. And we are really taking a look at the funds we already have and are we deploying them as well as we should, and what do we do? Again, we know that our graduate students are both getting an incredible world-class education, they are aware of that, and contributing to making this a world-class institution. So please know that we fought and said we've got to give the highest increase we possibly can. I will also tell you that it'll take 12 to 18 months for us to really get our fiscal house in order. But you have our commitment that this is something we're very aware of and working on.
Thank you. Damon, this next question comes to you. And access and affordability, we've noted, is much more than just tuition costs. So what are you and the university doing to support basic needs like food and housing for our students here at the university?
Yeah, Ben, I think Neeli mentioned that we have great financial disparities among our students. We have some students of means, and we have students who are profoundly without means. I think this is a national issue that, again, sort of like student mental health, people have become increasingly aware of in recent years and are much more committed to addressing. And here at Penn State, we have identified that we have a profound need among some students that focuses on basic needs, as you say, food and housing, but also medical care, transportation. It can take a variety of forms. And when you have those kinds of insecurities, your student success is compromised. It's just not going to be as easy for you to succeed in the way that you should. We have pantries at every location now, food pantries. We have expanded the food pantry at University Park with support from a variety of sources and donors. We have live-on housing grants that are available to students that have really been very, very helpful for those who have housing insecurities. This is an example, I think, where we're being strategic in response to this budget challenge, because We've had to increase staff actually in student care and advocacy. We have hired some new case managers and other staff members who are focused pretty acutely on this issue and providing support to students both at University Park and on the Commonwealth campuses. And so I think there's a network of support that students need to reach out to when they are in need. And this is another example where we are learning some things as we go. We did a survey of all students or some students at University Park last year. This year, later this fall, we're surveying all students at all locations, including World Campus students, to really get a little more granular in our understanding of what this issue is and how best we can respond to it. So this is, as I say, an example where we are committing more resources because we've identified a need. And I think we're going to continue to face various challenges in that way, where we may have to make choices among things that we can focus upon as we try to do some new things in a different way that engenders greater student success for all students.
Thank you. Sticking with the housing question for just a little bit, it's been noted by some of our submissions that we have more students in supplemental housing, and they're wondering if we over-admitted this year, and they're frustrated with that situation when combined with a raise in tuition. Sara, do you think you could address that?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Thanks. So our supplemental housing rooms are set up just like regular residence hall rooms. They're large spaces. They're equipped with furniture. We go in and we make sure that they're safe, that they follow code compliance, that they touch up paint or make it warm and cozy as much as possible. So we believe that any questions we've had or concerns have been resolved, but by all means, if you've got remaining concerns, please reach out to the Housing Operations Office or to the Residence Life staff so that we can resolve any concerns that you have.
Thank you. Sara, one more for you. And we had a parent write in, and they were somewhat surprised when they got their tuition bill when their student graduated, or didn't graduate, but moved from sophomore to junior level, and there was an increase that they weren't expecting. Can you explain that sort of tiered system, particularly where it looks at that breakout?
Happy to do that. So we do have two tuition schedules, one that is for lower division and one that's upper division. Typically, a student goes into the upper division right around their third year of college. They start getting into classes that maybe are of a smaller size or have more expenses associated with their individual programs. And there is an increase in cost in those upper divisions. We do everything we can, again, to keep the costs of education as low as possible. And again, as you move through the journey of your academic experience, some of those costs and intensities get to be more as you proceed, and we have had a tuition schedule that takes that into account by charging less in those lower divisions.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, that's where we have to end with our questions. We are closing in on the hour. We did get a few questions that we didn't quite make it to, but we will do some follow-up communication through Penn State News and Penn State Today, so keep on the lookout for that. There will also be a story announcing when this town hall and the previous town hall will be archived and available for viewing in case you'd like to go back and watch again or if you missed a part of it. I'd like to thank everyone who submitted questions. I'd like to thank our panelists for answering those questions. And again, I'd like to thank WPSU, our production partners here. They've done a wonderful job in making this look so good today, and we appreciate your hard work. And Neeli, to wrap us up, would you like to say a few words?
I just want to say thank you. Don't forget, we have the best students that I have ever seen anywhere, and together we can do anything. So I'm proud of you. Take care of yourselves. Let's take care of one another. And we are
Penn State.
Penn State.
Good job. Thank you.